My 10-year-old headphones started falling apart, so I just put some fucking tape around it. That's how cheap I am. Greetings, traveler. I'm SnapJelly, and a couple days ago, Shad from the Shadiversity channel, this beautiful man, beautiful beard, he released a couple videos talking about LARP, called Why LARP is Awesome to Learn Sword Fighting in HEMA, and after that he uploaded a second video called The Problems with LARP in Sword Fighting in HEMA. Now, I wanted to respond to those videos because, frankly, he says some things that I don't really agree with, especially in his first video. And although some of my criticisms are touched upon in his second video, it's not really what I think about it. So I'm not trying to bash Shad, and Shad, if you see this, I love you, boo, I really do. But you know, just take this video as another guy's perspective, so to speak. Now, if you don't know me, I started LARPing when I was, I believe, 13 years old. Then I stopped LARPing after a few years, and I LARPed for a while as an NPC. Eventually I didn't like it that much anymore, and since a few months I've been active as a scenario writer. So for the LARP that I used to LARP it myself, so I'm a DM now, essentially. But for me, LARP, it kind of evolved into things like HEMA and reenactment, which I personally just like more. But you know, I get perspectives from both sides, so to speak, like Shad. But yeah, I just wanted to respond to some of the things that Shad said in his first video with why LARP is awesome to learn sword fighting in HEMA, and both links to both his videos are in the description below. If you haven't watched them, I highly recommend that you do. But yeah, I'm just going to show some clips of Shad's video to see what Shad says, and tell you guys what I think about it. So that's what this video is going to be. Let's begin. Shad, I'll watch the entire commercial just for you. I gotcha.
For myself, I wouldn't go to LARP to learn how to sword fight, but there's some really good things that you can get out of LARP in that regard. And so one of the big things that I find is a huge advantage in LARPing to learn how to sword fight is freedom to experiment. Now, what I'm about to say next doesn't apply to all HEMA practitioners or schools, but it certainly exists where you can find certain HEMA instructors and stuff like that who will tell you you're not allowed to do it, that this is the way we're doing it, and we're doing and I've literally come across this exact statement. Why are we doing it? Because the treatise or the book said that we do it, which I don't think is a good mentality for myself, because there's some pretty dumb things that can come from historical sources that are not effective in combat. One of the best examples is throwing pummels at people. I do not think that to be a viable swordsmanship maneuver. And so the mentality that if it's in the historical manual, you do it. No, I don't agree with that, but not all HEMA practitioners do. In fact, most HEMA practitioners understand the practical side of things, that we're not going to do it just because it says in the book. We're going to try and figure out how this is supposed to work. And we're not going to teach you to do it until we figure out the correct context in which this is used, and this is the big value in HEMA. But because there is that, you know, it exists in some parts, and it's the minority, in my opinion, I hope it is, where they don't allow you to try something new, or to try a different stance, or to try something that's in the manual but do a variance on it. What if I want to change my footing, or I don't want to hold the sword so close to my body in this exact stance? What if I want to hold it out, but I'll do the same cut from this position? And so being allowed to experiment to figure out what works for you, I think, is a great advantage and benefit in learning how to sword fight. And in regards to LARP, that's all that it is. Very few LARP groups will try and teach, you know, full technique and stuff like that. That can be a detriment, and I'll get into that, into the problems with LARP, where incorrect technique, bad footing, and types of attacks and other things like that are considered the right way to do it, because it works to the people who are using it, when they're not using it in the correct environment to really test to see if it's properly effective. Yet sometimes you just want to try something to see if it works. I'm not saying it because people can get, take it the wrong way. Freedom to experiment, of course, exists in HEMA and other places where you can learn swordsmanship. It's only that in regards to LARP, there is no barriers in regards to this except for their rules. If it breaks one of their, rules, then you're not allowed to experiment in that way. So there is a limitation there, but I love just the casual freedom about just try and hit the other person with your sword, and if you can, good. Of course, with full swordsmanship, there's more than just hitting your opponent with your sword. Again, next video.
Alright, so regarding this, I think Shad is right. There are a lot of HEMA groups and practitioners that are really rusted stuck in what they believe is right, and no one else can do it any other way. It has to be that way because that's the way that they do it. And I agree with Shad on saying that is not the right attitude. But I do not agree with Shad on saying that LARP is a great way to kind of try and find that uniqueness in terms of finding your own style. You see, it can be really difficult, especially if you have a teacher that does not allow you to do anything your own way. That's just bothersome because, well, everybody is different. Everybody has a different body, and if you have some like, especially if you have X legs. For example, I have X legs and flat feet, so this results in a lot of cases in me having a very wonky, unstable position. I always need to twist either my knee or my foot a wrong way in order for me to stand in a stable position. Now, a lot of people, when they see my legs, they go like, you're not standing right, but that's the way that I'm stable. And, well, again, this changes because if I spar for longer periods of time, then I get tired, my form starts failing, so that's a problem. But if a teacher would tell me, no, you have to put your knee all the way in front of you, then I would tell him, well, I can't. Because I physically can't, my knee can't point that far. So, there are some troubles there, and I agree with that, but LARP is not the right place to experiment with different kinds of form for yourself, in my opinion. Okay, opinions there. That's his opinion, this is my opinion. Because, well, quite frankly, LARP does not put any emphasis really on proper technique in terms of HEMA. And LARP fighting is so different from HEMA fighting, quite simply because, well, it has to be. There is a difference between fighting effectively in LARP and fighting effectively in HEMA. Quite frankly, the tools that you use for LARP swords, do not allow you to do most of the things that you would do in HEMA, and most of the things that you would do in HEMA are just redundant in LARP. They are not necessary because there are easier solutions to things. And there are some things that specifically for me, I didn't really learn any proper swordsmanship through LARP, but there are some parts of HEMA that I can translate to LARP if I do, again, still play as an NPC or something. There's some moves in HEMA that I can use in LARP that are effective, but I never really noticed it to be any other way. You see, like in LARP as a kid, I used to do this thing where I would stand in a posta frontale. In your delivery, so it's having your sword straight up in front of your body. And I would kind of try and bait people into going for my leg, and as they did, I would step back and kind of do like a swerkout to their arm. I have tried that so many times in HEMA, but it just doesn't work. Every single time it results in me getting the sword just stuck in my neck. Because people fight differently in HEMA than they do in LARP. And that's a point that Shad is going to talk about later that I really don't agree with. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it now. I'm going to address it later still. Let's continue with the video.
The next thing that I think is brilliant about LARP is the experiment. I mentioned experimentation, but what I talk about, experimenting with different weapon combinations. Like in LARP, you will fight someone using a sword and shield, and then you'll fight someone who's using a polearm, and then you'll fight someone using two swords, and it's like in the same session, which is brilliant. And I've rarely found that in nearly every other swordsman fighting thing. Now, reenactment has a bit more of variance in types of what weapons are being used and stuff like that. But in regards to, say, HEMA, more often than not, longsword is the most popular one that I've observed. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong, but it looks to be longsword by far the most popular, with saber also being very popular, and then of course there's rapier and stuff like that. But what you really often find is the people who are learning longsword are fighting against other people using longswords, and the people who is learning saber is fighting other people using sabers, same with rapiers and stuff like that. And fighting people using other weapon sets seems to be more of the novelty than the norm, whereas in LARP, fighting people and other weapon sets seems to be the norm than just fighting people with the same type of weapon, which is, I think, brilliant. If you practice your whole life, you know, in longsword to only learn how to fight someone with a longsword, and as soon as you come up against someone with a shield or a polearm or something like that, you could be pretty screwed. And of course, you know, extended practice will help you out to try and adapt, but actually practicing against those types will be even more beneficial than not.
Now again, with this one, I get where Shad is coming from. Like, if you go to a HEMA school that teaches, let's say, Lichtenauer longsword, then all you're gonna learn is Lichtenauer longsword, and nothing else. So in a way, that makes you a good swordsman, but just on one part, right? Just a tiny little piece, and there's a lot more to fighting in general. That's true, but, again, I don't think that LARP is the right place to try and experiment fighting different weapons. Because, well, there's a lot of difference between looking at a LARP sword and a LARP mace. Both of them are incredibly light. Many guards on LARP swords don't do anything. A lot of them are just decorative and are floppy. There's they're not solid. They just flop around, so you can't do anything with the guard. So in a way, a LARP mace is no real different from a LARP sword of the same length. It's pretty much the same. Usually LARP swords have round cross sections as well, with the grips, I mean. So there's no real difference in handling those or fighting against those. Whereas if you, in HEMA, fight against somebody with a sword that is the same length but has a balance point that is different, that is going to make a huge difference in how his sword handles, right? And how you are going to have to counter his sword. There's going to be changes there. Now again, it's a lot like Shad says, it depends on what HEMA school. Not every HEMA school limits itself to just longsword or just saber or just something. A lot of them do, but not everyone. So it depends on what school you're from. But that's why I always encourage people to try, if possible, and I understand that a lot of you guys are not going to be capable of doing this, but if possible, try and fight with as many people as possible, right? Try and go to different schools, even if it's just for one lesson, but just get another take on the same thing, because that can be so beneficial to you, just as a fighter in general. If you always fight with the same person, then you're just gonna become good at fighting that one person, right? Because you're gonna get used to his moveset or her moveset, but you won't really become a good fighter overall. And that's really what I think is the problem here. If you want to become a good sword fighter overall, you're gonna have to get as much experience as possible, and LARP is part of that. LARP can get you, in my opinion, what's good about LARP is it can get you great stamina if you do fight, because LARP fights, they tend to last forever. People have huge amounts of hit points. You run around the field, you smack each other. LARP fighters are incredibly fast as well, so you really have to be active, and that can get you great stamina if you do that a lot. But likewise, if you do HEMA training and you do that a lot, you could get great stamina from that as well. So, I think LARP is to get an overall picture, it can be beneficial. But in terms of wielding weapons, different kinds of weapons against other kinds of weapons, it really doesn't matter, because for LARP, it's really just about reach. Reach is the only thing that really affects how a weapon fights, in my experience in LARP. And with other weapons, like HEMA weapons, real weapons, that's just not the case. There's so much that makes a sword effective the way that it is, or a mace, or an axe, or anything. And slight changes can have a huge difference. And with LARP, that is just not the case, not as much at least. So I don't really think this is valid. I do agree that a HEMA school should not, if possible, try to limit itself to just one thing. But there's, that's a double-edged sword in a way, because if you limit yourself to one thing, you can become incredibly good at that one thing. And if you want to try a little bit of everything, then you'll never really excel at anything, right? So you're gonna have to figure out for yourself what you want to learn specifically. You're gonna have to make choices and put a lot of effort in learning like a few things, like 2 or 3 things, and then perhaps drop something for a while and practice something else for a while, and you find out for yourself how it works. But if you try everything, like 1 week you're practicing this, the other week you're practicing that, you're never really going to become good at anything. So, you know, you kind of have to meddle a little bit in there. But it is true, I think, that it's not good to just fight with a sword, with one long sword against another long sword, or saber against another saber. There should be varying kinds of weapons, just for the experience, just to get the total picture of what it's like to be a fighter, just to be good with a weapon. But I don't think LARP is the place to get that.
The next really awesome thing about LARP is that it's basically constant sparring, okay? Now, when you're trying to learn any martial art, and especially, you know, sword fighting, sparring, I believe, is an absolute essential thing. And any martial art that doesn't do sparring, the people basically will not learn how to apply the techniques they're learning in a combat situation. But if it's only sparring, well then people will not actually figure out the correct footwork and forms, stances and positions that they need. So it should be a combination. Still, what is just so amazing is how much correct technique people do figure out on their own just by sparring.
Okay, now this was interesting to me that you said this, because my experience is frankly the exact opposite. I tend to find, like a lot of people, that there are quite a few in LARP, ex-LARPers or still LARPers in my group that learn about HEMA through LARP, or maybe they know me, you know, and find out about my channel, find out about HEMA and stuff like that. So one of my teachers is an ex-LARPer, so a lot of his LARP friends got into HEMA through him and stuff like that. But what we experience in our group is that LARP fighters tend to have this set of mistakes that they just keep on making, and that it tends to be really hard to get rid of. And we actually have a name for it. Translated to English, we would call it fighting LARP-like, essentially. And we usually find that it's not really beneficial. LARPers have great distance judging, they tend to have good reflexes as well, but that's the thing, they are just fast in their reflexes, but they have the complete wrong reflexes. And I experience that it's usually harder for a LARPer to get rid of his past reflexes than it is for the complete beginner that has no prior experience to start learning the right reflexes. Because the LARPer has been fighting years with doing what he does the way that he does it, which in HEMA might not work, because like not keeping your point in line and stuff like that. Because, well, frankly, he has always been doing it. That's just his reflex now. As soon as he gets an incoming blow, he just goes wham! Like that. And that's a problem that I usually face in my experience with LARP. If you parry with a LARP sword, aka just smack another sword away, then you can smack a sword away pretty hard, because LARP swords, they bounce off each other. So if somebody strikes you, you can go wham, and your sword will just bounce back a little bit. Now with a steel sword, that's not so much the case. So you swing and LARPers go and they go, and their sword just flies off into space or something like that. They'll still hold it probably, but it's all the way over here and they open themselves up. So that's one of the things that I find that LARPers do a lot. If you feint, their sword just goes wham all the way over there, and then they're open to attack. Now you can get rid of this. Like a lot of LARPers can become great swordsmen. I'm not saying that they can't, but I also find that on LARPers it is more likely to, as a fight prolongs, as you spar for long periods of times, that they fall back to their old routines, and people who have no prior LARP experience tend to not do that so much. So this is just the way that I see it. And that's one thing, just a pretty obvious thing, that I find that LARPers do. And talking about proper technique, that really depends on the person. But there are some LARPers that pick up the right technique very fast and just have a knack for it, so to speak. But again, on the other hand, a lot of LARPers, in my experience, most LARPers tend to really not mind the technique so much. And same with what I just said about getting rid of bad habits, is just that they have been doing fighting so long the way that they've been doing it, whereas there might be more efficient ways. And then you could say that, well, that's just their style, but I would also argue that the style that you've always been doing might not be the best or the most effective or what have you. And it really depends on how you look at it. Like, do you want to become the best fighter you can ever be? Or do you just want to fight effectively to an extent that you think is reasonable? If the latter, then no problem, all power to you, do what you want. But a lot of HEMA practitioners practice HEMA because they want to become the best that they can become. And they have this weird footwork ingrained in their brains, and it's so hard to get it out. Whereas somebody that starts with a blank slate, he has nothing in the way, and all information that he gets, all new information that he gets, it just goes in there and he does it right away. Whereas LARPers, they might pick it up easier than people that have no prior experience, but they also fall back to their old routines, in my experience. So I don't really think that LARPers tend to have proper technique just based on sparring. Actually, personally, I've talked about this before in the past. Sparring is important, and I really like that HEMA has a lot of sparring. Like Shad says, it's essential if you want to become a good fighter. But on the other hand, I also think that people start sparring too fast before they have any proper technique training, before they have any proper form, in which case sparring really isn't beneficial at all. All you're doing is wailing at each other. And you're not really practicing any techniques simply because you don't really know any techniques yet. You're not comfortable with your weapon yet. In that case, it really doesn't benefit you, and that's what I think about LARPers for the most part. They kind of wail at each other, and they got good timing, they got good distance judging, and they're really fast, but they're really not practicing any technique. So I don't really agree with you there talking about that LARPers have learned proper technique through sparring. Most of them tend to not. A lot of them do very weird things that you don't see in HEMA simply because they aren't effective. Like dual wielding swords. Like, I've tried it a lot. It's really fun, especially when we do shows and fight choreography. Dual wielding is a real fun thing to do, but it's just not that effective when you talk about actual combat. So, you know, a lot of things like that. There are a lot of things like that make LARP fighting different from HEMA to such an extent that it is not beneficial if you had this prior experience in LARP. And it really depends on the person how easy it is for you to get rid of these habits, how easy it is for you to learn different things. But in my experience, it tends to not be beneficial to people if they have a prior LARP experience. It's better if you can just mentally get rid of everything you previously thought was right, you previously did, and just start over and get like a mental state that says, no, this is what I do at LARP and this is what I do at HEMA. It's the same with people who, if you practice rapier fighting in the beginning, and then after you're done rapier fighting, you switch over to longsword fighting. You'll find that half of the class they'll stand in their Vomtag and they'll have their right foot forward, simply because, well, we just did rapier, and with rapier you have your right foot forward. And they don't have that mental state that tells them, oh, I'm holding a longsword now I'll put my left foot forward. It's just, you know, they'll do it automatically, and that's what LARPers tend to do. They do it automatically, the way they're used to, not per se the way that's most effective. So, you know, and it really depends on how serious you are about it. If you talk about, if you talking about proper form and stuff like that, I think form is really important, just overall. And I say this because a lot of people just in general want to become the best fighters they can be. And, you know, in which case these habits can be just a bother. But, you know, it depends on you. If you think it's bothersome for you, then that's a problem. If you don't care, then it doesn't matter all that much. But, well, you know, these are just my 2 cents about it. Whatever, let's continue.
I gotta say, I really dislike the hate that LARP can get, and I've seen this come from both HEMA and reenactment, where they're like, they're using foam weapons, that's so pathetic. That really ticks me off. And I've even had people try to accuse that of me, because I've put up some videos of me doing LARP on here on my channel. Go watch them if you'd like to see me doing LARP. And there was one comment, and you probably, there's thousands of comments now, so good luck trying to find it. But something saying to the effect that, I can use a foam sword, you know, adequately, but give him a steel sword, he'll fall over and he'll barely be able to hold it up. Well, then later I've used steel swords. And I've trained with foam swords and seen the difference. And it's amazing, okay, how effectively an analog, a foam sword, can be in learning technique compared to when you just pick up a steel one. And it's interesting. I haven't had many opportunities to actually engage in aggressive sparring with steel swords. I got to rely on the synthetic ones. So those are the nylon swords and foam swords as well. But I have had opportunity to do aggressive sparring with steel swords. What I can say absolutely from first-hand experience, I felt no limitation, anything. I was able to use a steel sword as effectively and proficiently and comfortably as I could a nylon or foam one. So just because people use foam swords is not cause or reason to try and bash on them, which is an elitist attitude to try and say, oh, we're so much better than them. People can actually learn how to fight decently effectively through LARP, okay? That's just what it is. And anyone who says that they can't, I feel they're doing a disservice and being disingenuous.
All right, this comment baffles me, to be honest. This is really what caused me to make a response video to this, because again, my experience is completely different, and I find it really strange. Again, Shad, I'm not trying to bash you or anything, all respect to you guys, but like, I really don't think that the LARP sword is a good analog for a real sword. In fact, quite the opposite. That's one of the reasons why I tend to tell people that LARP is not effective to learn sword fighting, is because the swords handle so incredibly differently that you cannot use a LARP sword like you would in HEMA, because if you would, then it wouldn't work, it wouldn't be effective. There's so many differences essential differences between how a LARP sword functions and how a steel sword functions. Like the thing that I mentioned just now, the bounciness of swords. Like if two steel swords collide, they go clang, and that's it. If two LARP swords collide, they do boom, 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 like that. LARP swords are floppy in all directions. Now, steel swords are, if you talk about HEMA swords, reenactment swords are usually very stiff, but HEMA swords, they are floppy as well, but in the direction of the flat, not in the direction of the sharp part of the blade. So, and this is essential to how a sword moves. If you want to bury a sword, these are important things to know. Like, edge alignment is very important when you throw a cut, and with LARP, people don't care. Grips on LARP swords are round, because it just doesn't matter. LARP swords tend to flop around a lot. Like also, steel swords, they kind of, when they collide, they slide over each other. You know, with a very nice sound, they do that. But LARP swords, they don't. They are latex or rubber or something, and as soon as they touch, if they touch slightly, they just kind of stick together and don't rub. So any complicated binds, like that require the guard, for example, that you have a lot of in HEMA, you can't do that in LARP. Because, well, the swords do not allow it, and then, again, depending on what LARP you go to, physical contact might not be allowed, or regulated at least, so there's no grappling, no wrestling, which is a huge part of HEMA as well. You know, so there's a bunch of things that cause LARP swords to not be good analogs for longswords, or faders, or whatever, and honestly, this surprised me that you say this, because I don't understand how you experience that there's no difference. Like, even when you just talk about the weight, right? Swords are not heavy, but they are heavier than LARP swords. A LARP sword is so light that the point of balance on a LARP sword really doesn't matter all that much in terms of how the sword handles, right? It matters slightly, but honestly, it does not change a thing. But on a long sword, or any kind of steel sword really, if it's a couple 100 grams heavier than another sword, it's gonna wield a very different way. If the point of balance is just out a bit further, it's gonna have a lot more punch. If it's closer to the handle, it's gonna be overall easier to wield, but it's gonna be easier for your opponents to parry you and stuff like that. Like, these things, they change so much when you talk about steel swords, and that's just not apparent in LARP. So this surprised me. I don't understand how you got to this conclusion, because I know I've seen your steel sparring videos. I know you do LARP as well. So, like, I say these things because I got experience from both sides. You know, a lot of HEMA practitioners say that, oh, LARP is stupid because foam swords, blah blah blah, and they have no experience in LARP, so I usually I'm just like, shut up because you don't know, right? And then on the other hand, a lot of LARPers, they go like, ooh, they talk about swordsmanship and blah blah with having no experience in HEMA or reenactment or anything. So again, I'm just like, well, how can you know? Because you haven't experienced it, right? And I've experienced both sides, and I can fairly certainly say that a LARP sword or LARP fighting is nothing like HEMA. It's nothing like actual swordsmanship, and I've LARPed in various different groups as well. So I don't understand this. I'm sorry, I don't agree. I gotta say on this point that you make right here, I feel the exact opposite way. Would agree to disagree, I suppose. This is baffling. But yeah, I gotta say that. I gotta have to just flat out disagree with you here. I don't think a LARP sword is a good analog. I'm not even a big fan of the HEMA practice swords that have foam on the outside. If you want to look for a synthetic sword, I recommend that you use the Rawlings ones. These are still incredibly light. They are heavier than LARP swords. They are lighter than steel swords. But you know, these have a balance point that is realistic for a longsword about here. It's you know, that's fairly normal for a longsword. They are light enough that you can't hurt yourself all too much, but they can still excel, get really great speeds, and they are still very hard. And I actually broke a finger on one of these, so you still need protection, a lot of it. But these, because the swords, they slide like steel swords do, right? They don't stick to each other like LARP swords do. And these allow, like, the guards are not incredibly strong, but at least they allow for some binds for you to do, right? And a complaint that a lot of people have about these is that they are floppy. Mine is a lot stiffer than the one that most people have, and I don't know why. All I know is that I got mine from Cult of Athena, and nobody I know got theirs from Cult of Athena. So if you want one of these, I'll leave a link in the description below where you can buy it. But yeah, I would recommend that you, if you want something synthetic and safe, so to speak, that you use one of these and just medium amounts of protection, rather than a HEMA practice sword that is padded, because this is just not an accurate representation. But I guess you disagree with that, Shad. This one confused me, honestly. I don't know what else to say. So that was the video. Once again, I would like to remind you that I have no beef with Shad. I love his channel. Links to his videos, again, are in the description below. You should watch him if you haven't yet. And, well, this was just my 2 cents on the matter. If you stuck around this long, you might as well subscribe. And also follow me on social media. Links are in the description below. And thank you for joining my quest. And I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye, guys.